Welcome to the Tabletop Gaming Guild podcast. Tabletop Gaming Guild is all about the experiences and memories that playing board games with friends and family can create. Tonight is a special edition as we have Tony from Little Wars TV joining us to talk about games and miniature gaming in general and seeing what we can do for people that enjoy board games and bringing them into another hobby possibly to enjoy.
Gentlemen, thank you for having me. I'm Tony. I'm part of a podcast, part of a YouTube channel called Little Wars TV. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, and I'm guessing that's probably a fair percentage of people who are going to be listening to this, we're a channel devoted to showing historical miniatures wargaming, and we'll talk about that's going to be the thrust of what we talk about, what exactly that is, and how you too can participate in this fascinating hobby.
So how did you get started with this? I know you didn't start off with just having Little Wars TV. What got you started in that hobby?
I was, even in childhood, I was a history buff. I blame part of that on my dad because late night, the ABC movie of the week or whatever the hell channel it was, there would be a war movie and my dad would let me stay up late to watch it with him. And so, saw Battle of the Bulge and Patton and all that sort of stuff on TV. And that started my love of history. And we had toy soldiers. We always had toy soldiers as kids and G.I. Joes. And I discovered I had a neighbor who was older than me, and he had Panzer Blitz and Midway. Right? And I was like 10, and I was fascinated. And he was like, "Oh, you can't learn this." I'm like, "No, seriously, let me." And I talked him into letting me borrow Panzer Blitz. And I read that rules folder over and over and over and over again. And I pushed counters around by myself. And then he and I played. And we played some Midway. And then from there, I got some games of my own. And D&D came along. And I think D&D is really, for a lot of people, D&D and Warhammer 40K were gateways into this hobby, depending on what generation you are. And I played D&D. And from there, somebody said, "Oh, miniatures. You need miniatures for your..." There were ads in Dragon Magazine. "You need miniatures for your games." And went to the local hobby store. Not only did they have some, little grenadier dwarves that I could paint, but they had micro armor.
Oh, boy.
Utterly fascinated by that. And before too long, I had a little collection of micro armor. I had a copy of the old Angrif rules. And I had a copy of Tractics, which was produced by TSR, which was super granular. Advanced squad leader from the age of the mimeograph, basically. Stuff like that. And then it just expanded. And then one day I was at the local comic store, and there's a bunch of guys playing war games in the back. And I had been heavily involved in the SCA, and I was kind of getting out of that. And I was looking for some way to do that whole military recreation thing. And there's some guys playing war games. I'm like, "Hey, what do we have here?" And it was the group that I've been gaming with now for almost 20 years. And slowly we wound up with our own clubhouse and the TV channel and blah, blah, blah. Just steamrolled at some point. But that's basically, and I still play D&D. I run a game. I'm going to say every month, every 3 to 5 weeks, whatever the schedule is. Now that we're all adults, that's much harder to do.
That's true.
I was going to say, I loved playing Midway and Jutland when I was a kid. I loved both of those.
I played my first copy of Jutland till the counters were delaminated. And it's sitting up on a shelf somewhere behind me with a second copy that's actually like you can see what the counters are supposed to represent.
That's funny.
It's a brilliant game.
It is. It was amazing.
Oh, it's funny you say Midway. That was actually the first AVHO game that I actually played with my dad.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, that was that game is ancient. I think originally that game goes back to like the late 60s or mid 60s. It's been around forever. That wasn't something that my dad was into. He and a coworker friend of his played some of the Avalon Hill Sports Illustrated sports games. They had Avalon Hill did a whole series, like they did Status Pro football and Status Pro baseball and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
And all that was real popular, back in the 60s and 70s. And then the board wargaming thing, I don't want to say D&D killed that, but a lot of people started expanding out into other things. And, D&D and Warhammer Fantasy Battles and 40K and all of that. And that didn't kill the market because we're like in the golden age of board wargaming right now. I really do think we are. But for a while, it kind of drew people away from that market. And a lot of those people, I think, have come back. I know I've come back. I had sold a gigantic wargame collection, and then not only have I bought a bunch of new stuff, but I've kind of gone back and bought my childhood back.
Yeah, I'd almost go so far as saying like between 80 and 95-ish, all those hobbies almost disappeared.
Yeah. And it was like a black day when Avalon Hill closed up shop.
Oh, yeah. Oh, man, I loved Axis and Allies. I played so much Axis and Allies. I know that's not the greatest game, but I loved it.
I've never played that.
There's, I would say the time has sailed for Axis and Allies, but when I was a kid, it was amazing. I loved playing it all the time. There's better games now that do similar things, but at the time, it was the most readily available one. We played back-to-back tournaments like days. It was fun.
And I think that's one of those games that from there, it's easy to expand out into more complex war games. If that appeals to you, that's a good thing that, this was good. Let's try something else. Next thing you know, we've got another squad leader player.
Yeah,
that's it. Actually, I don't think that actually happens anymore. The only people playing squad leader or advanced squad leader are people older than I am.
That is true. Yeah, Axis and Allies is a great one because, you like moving that infantry across the board. How about we try it on this?
Yeah, exactly. We're going to look at how we get people who are playing board games, whether it's war games or non-war games, into miniatures games. And one of the things that I think happens quite frequently, and it's one of those one-size-fits-all answers that I don't think really works, is, well, if you're trying a miniature game for the first time, you should maybe play a skirmish game. And the idea that I'm going to do a skirmish game, so you only need like 10 or 12 figures. I mean, that's great. The cost of entry is pretty low, but depending on what you're used to playing as a board game, that 10 or 12 figure game that's over in 90 minutes might not actually be satisfying for you. I've always been like a big battle gamer. Don't get me wrong. I still have multiple copies of all the squad leader stuff on the shelf, and Ed and I do occasionally break out a squad leader scenario at the club. Nobody else is going to make it. We'll just get some pizza and we'll just put a squad leader game out for the two of us like old times. But outside of squad leader, I've always been like a big battle game kind of guy. The Russian campaign, Avalon Hill's The Longest Day, their Normandy campaign, which was this gigantic thing and it took forever. Stuff like that was always the thing that, because I know somebody's got to be a sergeant and lead a squad. Not me. I'm a field marshal. Whenever we do games, I prefer the ones where I'm going to command a corps. Any Tom, Dick, and Harry can lead a squad up the hill. I'm going to send that squad and 700 other squads just like them to their death.
So I say for me, because I mainly play board games. I'm not really into the RPGs thing so much. I do play it occasionally, but really board games and card games area. A couple of the miniature games that I really liked that I first started playing was going to be Star Wars Armada and the fighter pilot one for Star Wars.
X-Wing.
Star Wars X-Wing.
Yeah, X-Wing.
And I like those a lot. And they got into what scared me about Warhammer, me personally, was the cost of being able to keep playing it. Because they, both in Star Wars Armada and Star Wars X-Wing, they kept coming out with better and better units. So if you wanted to play, you'd have to have those better units. So in a way to segue into you guys, one of the ones that I played that I really liked and doesn't have that problem was when Evan brought the Tombstone Tinderbox to the game day. That's everything that I need. I don't need to worry about getting bigger, better units, and I can enjoy a miniature game. So for myself, I'm not into the having to continually collect. I would rather buy books that teach me new scenarios and stuff than continually having to buy like special miniatures. But that's just me. And I did really enjoy that a lot. And I like that you guys have those free scenarios online too, so I can keep playing it.
Well, and that rule set is by the brilliant Mark Festoso, who also wrote another rule set that I'll at some point plug as a potential entry-level game But yeah, the one thing about historical miniatures games as opposed to the sci-fi and fantasy games, part of the Games Workshop model, I believe, and I'm sure they'll send me a letter if I'm speaking out of turn here, part of their model is that they've incrementally increased the scale of the figures over the years, and they're constantly releasing new army lists and giving them new traits and blah, 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 so that you buy new figures, as you just spoke of. The one thing that historical games don't have, and as an advantage, and I don't know, I'm not saying that this is the reason you should switch to historical, but a French battalion in the Napoleonic War, nobody is going to release a new book giving them any new special skills. There are always going to be X number of guys marching with rifles. A Sherman tank is a Sherman tank, and while different rule systems may rate it differently, nobody's going to make you buy a new model of some variant Sherman that they just created. So there's that. That's not to say that you're not going to collect vast armies, because all of us have a ridiculous number of miniatures.
Yeah, I just looked it up. Yeah, Warhammer's on its 9th edition now, but one review I just finished doing that's got to go live onto the channel. I did a one that you guys have done, Bolt Action. I talked about that, talked about the rule set, and you're 100% right. Like, the infantry in 1944 is always going to look like the infantry in 1944. I have painted Germans in France, and I've done North African in 15 millimeter. They are painted, and I will never have to touch them again. And whether I play them in Bolt Action First Edition, Second Edition, or 15 other different World War II games, they will work. I don't have to worry about it.
Yeah, and that's, as long as both sides are based the same, you can work around the basing requirements in most any war game. I know we've played a lot of stuff with the rules say they should be on this size base, but we've got them based for something else and they're on that size base. We'll figure it out. So you're right. Once you got those 15 millimeter guys painted, you can use them in a bunch of different rules and a bunch of different scale games. That stand could be a squad in this game or a platoon in that game, if depending on what rule set you're using.
One like that I really, really want to play, I don't know if you've heard of it, is Gasland.
Yes.
You can just literally play with micro machines.
Mm-hmm. Do you guys go to any of the HMGS historical conventions? Have you been to Historicon?
I am shooting for it this year. Whether that will actually work or not, that's to be seen.
A good friend of mine who's always a volunteer at the conventions, he has run some just ridiculously good Gaslands games. In fact, a couple of friends I know who are at those conventions have run some Gaslands games that are just gigantic and mind-boggling and in some bigger scales, and we're going to do Thunderdome Plus on a table, and just that set of rules, if you're creative and you like to build stuff, you like to build some funky models, that set of rules lets you just run wild.
Yeah, it looks amazing. I would love that.
Oh yeah, and that's, by all means, make your way down to Lancaster this summer for Historicon. The venue is fantastic. It's in the center of downtown Lancaster, so there's a billion food choices to pick from, and there'll be a bunch of games. Everybody is chomping at the bit to get back to normal. Definitely. There's my plug for HMGS if you're listening. There's my plug.
So one thing you mentioned a couple of times here, and we've hinted around here, and one thing I definitely want to talk about is one thing that people get scared off with is that barrier to entry for a game. Because when you look, just since I already talked about a Bolt Action, like I'm holding the rule book right now. You look at it and it looks impressively thick, but once I got down to it, it's 120 pages worth of rules, which is a lot, but compared to a lot of other sets, it's not. And then you start looking at like Warlord's 28 millimeter line for that. It can get pricey very quick to get games, and I think when you look at that, you can be $100 to $50 plus to get a game in, versus I can pick up a board game for $50. I think that's a problem that people have when they look at that.
You're absolutely right, because, Warlord is following in the footsteps of some other companies in that they're marketing a line of figures to go with it. And their figures are pricey. Don't get me wrong. Their stuff is nice. They make some nice stuff, but it's pricey. But if you think about it for a moment, you have that rule book. You can do that in any scale. And to get a good size unit, to get a decent unit for Bolt Action, like you said, if you're buying the figures from Warlord, you're looking at $150 to get, some infantry and some support and a couple of vehicles, blah, blah, blah. You can do that in 15 millimeter for about $30. What do you need? You need 3-4 tanks and a couple of squads of infantry. My recommendation for 15 millimeter infantry is Peter Pig in the UK. They make a superb line of World War II stuff. They do Civil War. They're my go-to choice for World War II, for Vietnam. Their stuff is inexpensive. They're nice castings, but don't get stuck on scale. A lot of the miniatures rule sets currently out there, Bold Action and some of those, because the company is selling rules and miniatures. They're kind of geared to selling you their miniatures at their scale, but you can play that with any miniatures and any scale, and some of the smaller scales you can get quite a bit of stuff on the table for the same amount of money, or get the same amount of stuff for substantially less.
Like I said with that, I play it in 15 millimeter. I got mine on a couple lots of people getting rid of Flames of War stuff.
Absolutely.
Kept what I wanted, sold the rest.
Well, and that's the thing. One of the things that I would point out for people that want to get into some historical games, I've started playing this and I want to expand, but I don't want to spend a crap ton of money on this, is go to one of the HMGS conventions. There's only, at this point, there will be 2. There used to be 3. There's just going to be 2 from now on, just because of, the new reality that we live in and scheduling and whatnot. But there's a flea market all weekend long. There's a flea market, and people have hordes of stuff that they're selling. And quite often, I know I've done it, and I know I've bought stuff from people who were doing it. Some point in the day, you look at your watch and you go, yeah, get my stuff off the table and go have a beer. And you can find some real bargains. There's some groups on eBay, or some groups on Facebook that are buy and sell groups. You can find some bargains there. Resin printing is a good way. I bought a resin printer this winter, and I've started printing stuff. The printer is pricey. Let's face it. You're in it for $300, but if you're already doing some other sort of gaming, if you're doing some fantasy gaming, you're already maybe getting some miniatures together. There's a ton of free files for vehicles. Once you get up and going, you can print a great deal of stuff instead of having to buy ready-made stuff. So I would say if you're thinking about 3D printing, or you have a 3D printer, there's a way to make your entrance into historical miniatures gaming cheaper, because you can print crap.
Yeah, and in the long run, $300 isn't expensive if you're spending 10 cents, 11 cents per figure.
Right, exactly.
One thing I was going to say is conventions are super, super important for both miniature gaming hobby, CCG hobby, and non-D&D RPGs, because I feel that one of the biggest problems with those and getting people into them is that, will I like it? Will I enjoy the system I've never heard about in my entire life? And those conventions allow them to go and play it and see if they enjoy it and invest in it if they do.
Oh, absolutely. And there are some phenomenal conventions. In the last couple of, not counting COVID, but prior to COVID, I had started to expand my convention experience, in that I've been going to historical miniatures conventions for decades, but I thought, I want to get to some other conventions. I want to see what the rest of the world is doing in a convention setting. PAX Unplugged in Philly, I was stunned by the amount of space they have devoted to just pick up board games, this vast hall of basically cafeteria tables. And they had a library of games that you could check out and play. Grab a buddy, go over there if you didn't bring a game of your own. But they had this enormous room that was probably 100 feet on a side of just row after row of cafeteria tables, and this big assortment of games where anybody could go, and there was no schedule. Nobody was running anything. It was bring a game or get a game from the game library and sit down with somebody and play it. It was mind-boggling, the amount of people who just showed up at that convention to play a board game with, I brought my buddy and we're going to play this game. Then I'm going to grab a total stranger. We're going to play this game. That was a totally new experience to me. Conventions are a good way for people who are interested in games. You made that point. That's a brilliant way to look at it. Conventions are a good place to go and try stuff. Yeah, you have to pay to go to the convention, and it involves some travel, but the convention offers a couple of things. It lets you look at a bunch of different ideas and a bunch of different games and a bunch of different people's styles of running games. It lets you try all the stuff that you were maybe interested in but didn't want to invest in. But the other thing, and I think it's important, is it's on neutral ground. For many of us, whether we're doing role-playing games or board games or miniatures games, we have a group that we game with. I'm sure all of you have a group of people that you game with. And I think to some extent, we tend, not out of choice in most cases, but we tend to be a little insular. I like these guys and we can joke around. And so when there's a new person, we're like, we're kind of eyeballing that new person and we're minding what we say or do. And for the new person, I'm sure we've all been that guy at some point. For the new person, if you're in especially if it's at somebody's house, it's kind of awkward for the new guy. It's definitely awkward. And that's another barrier, I think, to entry. People that game at public places like comic stores or community centers are a little more accessible. There you only have to deal with walking into a little knot of friends. But for people that meet in some private space, it's hard to find that group. It's hard to get an invite. And then it's awkward when you go there. So, I mean, that's definitely a barrier. So the convention thing is really a great point.
Yeah, I think they're great for meeting new people, because I really do think that tabletop games are the perfect medium as a common talking point for you to be able to feel comfortable talking to new people and getting new people and it gives you something to base your conversations on, and then you can go from there. I met tons of people that I probably would never have talked to nor met in my entire life playing board games with strangers.
Oh yeah.
Sat down,
absolutely.
We talked about the game and had a lot of fun. Same with miniatures or any of that other stuff.
So if I was to catalog what things would be difficult for someone to go from board gaming to historical miniatures gaming, and I'm just going to stick with historical miniatures gaming. One, you have to obviously have an interest in history. And you don't have to be a historian, but you have to at least have some passing fascination. There has to be something to make you say, I want to lead Pickett's charge. There needs to be some little spark there that draws you to that. But we're assuming that if people are interested in how to get into it, they've already got that spark. I think the biggest barrier to entry is that if you buy a board game, everything you need is there. It's all in that box. Likewise, if you buy a role-playing game, you've got everything you need in that stack of 3 books. All you need is some people. A lot of the sci-fi and fantasy games are box sets. What's the latest evolution of Warhammer 40K? Or you get like Kill Team, where you get a box and it's the rules and it's miniatures and blah, blah, blah. And when you move into historical miniatures gaming, you don't have that. Been talking with somebody at a local game store that does strictly like fantasy games, and they do fantasy, they do role-playing games and 40K and Magic, which nothing wrong with any of that. I've done all of that at some point. And we've been talking about, he wants us to come in and he said, can you come in and like do some kind of historical gaming thing? And we got talking about it, and he was baffled by the notion that if you're going to do historical gaming, not only do you have to figure out what period and what size battle you want to do, but then regardless of what you pick, there's 40 different rule sets. None of them come with figures, and there's no scenarios. You can't go buy a module for, Normandy or whatever. You have to figure that part out, which for me personally is half the fun of the hobby. But that's a gigantic barrier for entry, because I got to figure out now, how do I paint the old guard's uniforms? What color is a panzer? All of that stuff. Where do I get the figures for this? It doesn't come in a package. So that's probably the single biggest barrier to entry. And I think that's where stuff like Raven Feast, which we put out in memory of our friend Al, who's no longer with us, Mark's Ruthless Rules and the Tombstone Tinderbox set. Those have, the Tombstone Tinderbox set has everything you need. Paint that stuff and put it on the table. It's a gunfight game. You have 5 figures on the side. You're golden. Raven Feast is Dark Age skirmish, Vikings and Saxons. It started out as a 2-page rule book. It's now a few more pages than that, but it's got, here's where you go online to get cool figures, and here's a photo tutorial on how you build a Viking hut or a long ship, and here's a painting guide kind of thing, so that short of figures and terrain, tried to put everything in it's a free PDF or like a $10 print book. Stuff like that is, and not to honk our own horn, but stuff like that is trying to get that segment of the gaming population that wants everything in a box, because that's a deterrent.
I don't want to hunt stuff around. I just want it to buy it, have it, and be done and play it. And it's really hard for me to get something and be like, I can get whatever.
Right.
And that's something I was going to mention later, but it's something fantastic that you guys did. The Tombstone Tinderbox is a great way to get into a game. The rule set is super simple, 2 pages. Anybody can read 2 pages and be done. Everything you need to know about each person's on a playing card. You can get it together. They're 15 millimeter. You can paint them up super fast. And you're playing the game right then and there. And the other rule set that you guys put out, Raven Feast, Greg actually just sent me a couple copies for after we were going to do a playthrough online with it, and hopefully give away some stuff with it to hopefully get some more people into it that like it. As you said, it's free online, and you even put into the rules, if you want to do this with paper minis, here are some.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll be honest, the most intense historical game experience I had, one of our members has a set of rules that will never see the light of day. Actually, he has several sets of rules that will never see the light of day, but they're brilliant games. And he has a set of modern gunfight rules, and he ran a scenario, and I don't know if you'll be familiar with it, the Miami-Dade FBI shootout from back in the 80s. The FBI makes some tactical mistakes, and they wind up showing up with revolvers facing 2 guys with high-capacity rifles, and it winds up with several FBI agents dead. We played it one night on like a 2x2 section of the table. And we didn't have anything on the table. We had one of those like 2x2 square rubber mats that are interconnecting. We had that. We had some file cards that we had labeled car, and just some paper cutouts, not even stand up, just pieces of notepaper with your name and torn out. And you played one guy. You only had one character involved in it. And at some point, I'm one of the FBI agents, and my miniature is ducked down behind the car, reloading the revolver while the bad guys are just spraying everything. And I'm thinking to myself, this is not how I go out. There is no blankety blank way that I'm going to die ducked behind this car. And Chow said, it's your turn. What do you do? I'm like, screw it. I got 2 rounds in here yet. I'm standing up and just popping. If I go down, I'm going down swinging. And all of us afterwards were like, whoa, that was some real stuff going on there. And it doesn't need to be fancy. I think a good scenario or somebody good running it, you can do it with paper counters, and it's going to still be a great experience.
Speaking as somebody who has very, very limited exposure to miniatures games, I've obviously played a lot of board games, and the cost isn't a huge deterrent for me, and probably a lot of people that are already into board games have the idea, like, how much joy does it bring to my life? Is it worth it because, I get this much entertainment out of it? So you can justify the cost in that, but where I find I'm often intimidated by the level of precision required, and I think that my impression is that's actually somewhat exaggerated. Like my few times I've tried to play, I'm always concerned, like, okay, especially when you pull out that measuring stick, and then it's like, okay, do I measure from the base or from the person? If I'm off by a millimeter, I feel like I've cheated. I think that's a little like extreme to me.
Well, and I would love to say that that's a one-off experience that you've had, but like any other hobby, I do believe that there are actual gatekeepers who feel that, no, we have enough people doing this, or whatever their reasoning is. And, we've all had that, whether it's in a role-playing game or a historical miniatures gaming. We've all been in that situation where we're like, wow, I really feel like I'm not having fun here. I'm being stressed because I'm on pins and needles because I'm either being made to feel less than competent by the other people at the table, or I'm made to feel that I'm somehow going to screw up or offend somebody. That experience is sadly not unique. And when you have an experience like that, it makes it more difficult for you to go back and try it again. You're certainly not going to try it again in that setting. And it's a shame that you had that experience, but unfortunately, that's not uncommon. And I would say you got to play around. And there again, back to James with the conventions. A convention is a good place. Some of the guys in our group, I've not yet done it, but some of the guys in our group, you scout out a game. Oh, I'm signed up to play such and such a game. And you scout out a game, and you kind of look at the table, and you look at the miniatures, you look at the people who are going to be there. And if you've gone to enough conventions, you get, signs that, oh, maybe this isn't going to be for me. In a convention setting, if you go and you're not enjoying the game, there's no shame in saying, hey, man, excuse me, but I hate to be a party. This is just not, I'm sorry, this is not for me, and get up and walk away. And the other beauty of that convention scenario is that you might be able to get in sometimes even the same scenario, but you might get into the same rule set run by a couple different people. And so you get a much better feel for how things are supposed to flow when, you see it from a couple different angles. I'm sure there's games that we've been playing for 10 years that we're still not playing correctly because we've never played it outside of our group. So I'm sure we've been making that same damn mistake every time we play it.
I'll say that's 100% true, because even with the board games where they have pretty much strict rules for board games. You follow these rules. This is the game. I've played games and I hated the game. I thought I hated the game. I actually just had a bad experience. And with a different group, the game was amazing. So yeah, I'm big on definitely play. If it's something that interests you, definitely try it a couple different times with a couple different people if you have that bad experience, because it could just be it didn't just work as a group, or they weren't playing your style. Like they were hyper competitive and you're not, or they weren't hyper competitive and you are, or you're somewhere in the middle. And that plays a factor into a lot of it.
That's absolutely right. And I think if we're honest with ourselves, we know what style of player we are. Very few of us at any rate would admit that, I'm hyper competitive. I must win at all costs. But, there's a fair percentage of that. We used to play squad leader when I was young, and I had a regular opponent who he cleaned my clock 9 times out of 10. I very rarely won a scenario against him, but we always had just a great time. And I always came away from the table having had a good experience and learned one more thing about the rules and the system. There are people who I enjoy gaming with, but their style is different than mine. So we try to find that thing that we're both comfortable with. It's not this guy's ultra competitive ego, or I'm in the mood to just go pew, pew, pew at somebody tonight. We've all been there. Like, I really don't want anything hardcore tonight. So yeah, there's something to be said by finding a style of play, an opponent's style that works for you, so that you have that good experience. It's the whole point of the hobby, is that we have a good experience.
Yeah, so I think that means that next time I'm in Pennsylvania, I have to actually meet Evan for the first time in person, and he's going to have to introduce me to some games.
I've got plenty.
Absolutely.
I was going to say, I think that's a good segue to start talking. So someone that plays board games, but might have that interest into some of the historical stuff. History is very broad, and definitely trying to find the, a particular time frame to draw your interest is going to be a challenge in itself. But overall, I mean, what would you say would be a good place that some board gamers start to segue their way into, board games or, miniature games? Where do we start?
Well, I think if you're interested, I'm thinking I want to try historical miniatures gaming. Okay, look locally for a club that you can stop in at. In this age of social media, it's pretty easy to find local gaming groups. Everybody's got a Facebook page, that sort of stuff. That's one way to find local groups. The local comic store is often, their business model is weird because the local game store feels that they have to have half their retail space devoted to people coming in there and loafing all day playing games. But oftentimes you can find people playing some different stuff that you haven't played before. So that's a good way. If you're up for an adventure, go to a convention. While the convention itself may at first seem overwhelming because there's lots of people and there's lots of stuff and lots of noise and stuff going on, it's an opportunity to be just a nameless face in a crowd and mill around and look. People are perfectly content with you standing over their shoulder watching them play. It's a good way to see what products are available in a vendor area, get into a game, and if you play it and you didn't enjoy it, you're really not out anything. You paid for the ticket for the convention, but you didn't buy any miniatures or waste a month of time painting stuff. Those are all good ways, I think, to try out the hobby. If you're thinking, hey, I'm going to get a set of rules and try this on my own, try not to be intimidated. Some of the rules can be large. Some of the best rule sets aren't large. Some of the best rule sets are quite large, but the amount of pages doesn't really dictate whether this is going to be the right set of rules for you. And though I kind of poo-pooed the notion, if you want to try a game, and I'm not sure if I want to get into this hobby, a skirmish game, something like Tombstone, like Ruthless, something like Raven Feast, Point Blank, or Disposable Heroes from Brigade Games. Our friend Keith wrote this. Our club played Disposable Heroes every friggin' Monday for probably 8 or 10 years. That was like the house rule set. Games like that, something that doesn't, Napoleonic games are probably right out unless you're a fanatic. And I'm just going to jump in here because Napoleonic games tend to be large battles with very high figure counts. A lot of skirmish games, whether it's World War II, modern, force on force is a good low figure count kind of game. It's an Osprey publication, so it's not hard to find. I would say start out by picking a period that interests you and just Google miniature war game rules for medieval and just read some reviews and then pick something that looks like this would be easy enough to start with. Don't feel you have to stick with it. If you buy it and you play it once or twice, you're like, I want to do medieval miniature gaming, but this isn't working for me. You know what? Get another rule set. A lot of stuff's available in PDF. War Games Vault, which is like the sister ship to Drive Through RPG. You can buy PDFs of all sorts of rules. So, that cost of rules isn't a giant barrier anymore. But I would say start small. Don't feel you have to remain small, but start with something easy. And if you're like, I want to paint a whole army of these, well, then you can look for a set of rules that's going to allow you to play a whole army instead of, one band. But don't throw yourself into Austerlitz.
I'm just going to throw this out because it's actually true. I'm not really doing it just to promote you guys, but in this day and age, for most people, that's actually probably too much. What they need is, what I think most people are looking for is easily consumable media to be able to quickly deduce whether they want to play a game. And in the miniature realm, they're going to want to watch tutorials, rule reviews, and such. And I really think that Little Wars TV and stuff like that is what you want to watch. If you want to pick a period and you want to know if you want to play that, go there, see if they have a rules review on it, see if they have a tutorial on it, watch those, see if it actually fits you. I think that people will be more likely to pick that game up if they can watch that media. They don't have to read through a rule book, the entire thing, to determine whether they think this is for them. They can get a quick overview, then jump into that. And I really think stations like Little War TV are what's propelling the miniature hobby forward and getting more people in there because of that consumable media. And people aren't spending, really, especially the new generation, I don't think, are spending a lot of time going through reading and digesting material. They want that, hey, immediately, in the next 10 minutes, can you sell me on this game, sort of thing. And I think that's what you guys bring to the table. And I've been watching some of your videos, and there's a couple that I'm pretty interested just from watching your things that I would never ever try in my entire life, because I would see that rule book, I'd be like, I'm not reading that to figure out if I like it. So not a promotion, I'm just saying you guys do great with that. And
I'm laughing because our rules reviews with our audience are either a love it or hate it thing. Either our rules reviews have zero value and are just a waste of bandwidth, or, oh my God, that was so insightful. There's like no middle ground. I don't know why, but there's no middle ground. And you're right. I know you youngsters are all thinking the internet is something more than a fad. Oh, you call me a youngster. Yay. But no, you're right. The channel itself actually started out of Greg had an idea. Greg was pitching an idea to TV people, a show about a group of war gamers. And every week there's personalities and there's drama and there's struggle and resolution and blah, blah, blah. And of course, nobody in the TV industry is like, my God, that sounds like a brilliant idea. That's not happening. We're looking for the next Friends. We don't care about whatever you're selling. But he thought, what if there's some other media that we could do this in? And he and I had talked. He and Steve cooked this whole thing up. And I told him, I said, you know what? That's a brilliant idea, because I don't remember what war game it was I was interested in buying, but it was pricey. And I thought, before I plunk down $100 on the latest thing from, MMP or GMT or whoever it was, let me go online and look and see if and what I discovered was there was an enormous amount of crap, not necessarily in the content, but in production value. I mean, don't get me wrong. You can make a good video with your iPhone or your Droid. It can be done, but no scripting, the shaky camera work and poor audio and weird lighting and no scripting. And I was like, I want to learn about this product, but I don't know that I'm going to sit through the video just because it's wonky and I can't deal. And Greg had noticed the same thing. He was looking for video for something. He's like, I really believe that we can produce quality wargaming content where we'll script it. Like, we don't script the game. The game plays the way the game plays, but we're going to have some scripted conversation before the game about what the game is about. We're going to do rules reviews with a formula. We're going to script the filming of the game in that we're going to talk about the history. We're going to let the players talk about what their plan is. We'll interrupt once or twice to ask them how it's going. And then we'll do some kind of wrap up at the end. And that part we kind of script out. And there is a lot, and I'm not saying we had any friggin' thing to do with it, but there has been a renaissance, because not that there was anything before, but we're in a time where the quality level of YouTube videos, and not just in gaming, because I watch a bunch of, we won't go into details, but a lot of weird stuff. The quality of video production on YouTube has just gone through the roof compared to what it was even 5 years ago. And you're right. That's a huge, everybody goes to YouTube for everything. You can find a video on, it doesn't matter what you're doing. There's more than one video on YouTube. So yeah, it's a great resource.
I think a lot of the thing they attribute to the high quantity of YouTube videos is just how cheap and easy it is to make videos now.
Mm-hmm.
Now, your guys' level is going to be more, but just to make a video.
My kids have shown that anything is out there on YouTube.
Yeah, I think you Google, you put anything into the YouTube search engine and there's a video for you.
I watch primarily fly fishing videos, welding videos. Not that I'm a welder, but you get a good welding video, I can watch that for an hour. My poor girlfriend, I'll sit in front of the TV and just one YouTube video and just segue from this idea to that idea. Real estate that I can't afford. And she's like, put something on. I'm like, I am. But yeah, the content is just fantastic these days. And I don't want to burst your bubble about our production values, but almost all of what we've done so far has been filmed on Canon DSLR. And up until this season, the lighting has been 2 floor lights, like with the pods. Like 3 or 4 pods that we bought at Target and screwed some floodlights into, which is why if you look at some of our videos in the club, there'll be weird shadows because we have too much space and not enough light. So like since then we've invested in an actual digital video camera. Mm-hmm. And some LED lights, and to give tribute to Mark Festoso again, in addition to being a game designer, he's an Emmy-winning producer for PBS, and he grabbed us at a convention, was like, hey, I like what you guys are doing, and I want to do some stuff with you. And we were like, can you tell us about real equipment? A couple of us went, he and some friends were filming a video, and they asked us to come join them. And I was just absolutely floored by his setup for filming videos. And he's got multiple cameras and these funky directional dimmable LED light boxes, and it's all hooked up to a laptop that allows him to edit the whole thing in real time. That's like amazing. 3 cameras and 4 microphones, and you can edit it in real time. I'm like, oh my God, we're just like primates. I feel like that ape in 2001 that discovers he can hit the other ape with the bone. Just like,
yeah, we're not too much farther for our YouTube stuff. I do most of mine on a newer iPhone, which is like at 4K at 60 frames per second, and the autofocus on it's insane. It's great, but if you would have told me how much I had to spend on equipment to keep it from moving and keep it steady and line everything up and the lighting, and I would have just bought a dang camera. Yeah. And I know almost nothing about like doing that sort of production level. That's amazing.
Yeah, and it's all the people doing the editing. It's all self-taught. We're using a $99 Adobe product to do the editing. And while we have somebody now who has professional editing experience helping us and editing some of the stuff for us and giving us pointers, and Mark has been a huge resource for us, you know, it's still a couple of amateurs, and it's a burden at times because we all have jobs and we have families and significant others, and we only have a limited amount of time. And you guys are all in the same boat, I'm sure. We only have a limited amount of time to invest in your hobby. And now we added this other layer to it. Nobody thought it would take off, and nobody thought anybody would watch it. And we just thought we'd do a couple of episodes and that would be that. Well, now we're like 3 seasons into it, and I don't know, there's like 200 with rules reviews and everything. There's like 200 videos or something ridiculous. And it's a lot of work for just a group of knuckleheads trying to put crap together on the weekends. Yeah, I'm glad people like it, but
it has to be fun too. So that's why I like doing it.
Yeah, you got 40-some thousand on YouTube. You have a successful Patreon. Now you're a couple rule sets in. Have done phenomenal stuff with Raven Feast, the Tombstone Tinderbox, and you're doing something great with Live Free or Die, with the proceeds going to Battlefield Trust. I mean, just everything you guys have been doing just for the hobby itself and for outside the hobby is just phenomenal. And I know from a lot of people into the hobby, we definitely always want to say thank you for what you guys do. It's fantastic.
Well, thank you for saying that. And we kind of, the whole notion from the beginning was that we were going to evangelize the hobby, that the whole purpose of what we do on YouTube would be to make it seem fun and accessible and take that message to the masses, as it were. And I don't know how well we've succeeded. And if we have succeeded in any way, it's as much due to luck and timing as any brilliant expertise on our part. I think it's just a group of guys who have fun playing war games and we enjoy each other's company. And I think that comes across in what we do. And that's, if there's an appeal to it, it's just a bunch of regular guys having a good time. And I think that's where the appeal is. And if somehow that draws people to play historical war games, bonus.
And I think you guys generate your own luck because of the hard work and dedication you put into it makes that happen. I would say, like, reviewing miniature games terrifies me. Reviewing board games is infinitely easier. I'll get up at like 4 a.m. and I'll review, like, in the next 3 hours, I'll review like 5 or 6 games that I've played. A miniature game.
Comfort zone.
Yeah. I just go through, like, it takes the rest of the week to edit it. It's there. To view a miniature game, that has to be an enormous amount of work because you have to paint the miniatures. A lot of these you actually have, like, scenery that you made and set up. And, like, how much time does it take? Like, if you wanted to review this new history miniature game, how long do they normally take you to go through the rule book, get all your stuff lined up, create the battlefield? What's the normal time frame?
Well, and one of the things, because now I don't want to say that what's going to happen on the channel drives what we do at the club, but once upon a time we played a certain, if we did World War II, we did these rules, and if we did medieval or ancients, we did these rules. But now as our membership has grown and as the channel has grown, every couple of weeks somebody's like, oh, hey, did you hear about, I got this cool new set of rules and I'm going to run a scenario. Fortunately, at this point, one of the things that's a big advantage to us is that we've been gaming together as a group for 20 years. So between the lot of us, we have a vast collection of miniatures and old beat up trees and buildings. And our club has a basement, which is just like everybody's crap is there. Well, not everybody's, but there's a good deal of crap that we've hoarded for gaming, for miniature gaming in the basement, and, like cubbies and Rubbermaid tubs and stuff. So if we get a new set of rules and everybody's super enthused about it, some idiot in the group will like, oh, I'll run this next week. And, we'll run it. If we're liking it, we'll run it again. And at some point when 2 people feel comfortable enough to voice an opinion about it, to make some kind of vaguely informed decision, let's do a rules review of that. And that's basically how that whole process works. And there's some stuff that we had high hopes in that were like, and there's some stuff that we were like, this isn't going to amount to anything. Ruthless, the Wild West rules, we a couple of years ago got into this, we're going to do Wild West. And it went through the club like wildfire. Everybody painted up a cowboy band. Like, we need scenery. We had like club workshops where we built Wild West stuff. We can fill, and I mean like densely packed Wild West town in 28 millimeter. We can fill like easily a 6x4 table and then some. We built all this crap. And then we didn't find a single set of rules that we liked. Nothing. We played half a dozen Wild West games. We're like, and all the scenery went into Rubbermaid tubs and went into the basement. And then at a convention, Mark was like, hey, I'm working on this like 2-page Wild West rules if you guys are interested in checking it out. Sure, we've got a bunch of stuff. We'll give it a try. And the first time we played it, we all just looked at each other and went, holy crap, this is what we were looking for in Wild West. And that was part of our enthusiasm that led to the Tombstone Tinderbox thing. We were just like, where was this all this time? Because, we had all that stuff. But yeah, there's no set process other than that we'll play it a couple of times. And like I said earlier, we'll play it with the wrong basing, a scale that was never intended for, just because, if we did it in 6mm, we could do this. So that's basically how that happens. It might look like we had a plan in the actual rules review, but getting to that point is kind of pell-mell.
So, true story about that. I showed up for this game day. I haven't had it all set up. First off, I am not a fan of Western games. I like the idea, but I've never found a game really. I mean, most Western games, when I play them, I end up not liking them at all. And then he brings out the poker cards with it, and I'm like, oh no, we're going to be playing poker. And start playing it, and I'm like, this is a really cool way of using the poker cards as sort of like your action cards in the game. I'm not actually playing poker. The game is super fluid, super simple, and you have like asymmetric powers on each of your different people. You have different scenarios you run. The rules are straightforward. It's all on that. It's all on one sheet of paper in front and back, so 2 sheets. Yeah. And you can go in as depth as you want into it, or just go in and have a lot of fun. I really, really enjoyed it. There was a lot of cool things you can do. In fact, one of the things was one of my guys was horrible at shooting guns. So I'm like, heck with this guy. They were hiding inside the saloon. So I just ran in and tried to start punching them. Well, I didn't have too much luck with that, but it was still fun. I really, really enjoyed the game, and I like the progression through the game because you go through multiple different scenarios really in a fairly quick pace. So you get there, you have your fun. It's over before it gets too long, and then you can jump into the new scenario, and it's interesting, especially the one where the different people are coming in at different times, so you get different units coming in. Really, really enjoyed that, and that game actually changed my opinion for miniature games.
That's awesome.
So I'm more into trying them out and playing them, because my former experiences that burned me out were mainly like playing with Warhammer people, and those never went well.
Well, and I think the appeal with Ruthless is that, let's face it, here in America, if you're of a certain age, we all grew up with the notion of cowboys and Indians and the Wild West, the gunfight at OK Corral. And you can take any Western movie, and there's hundreds to choose from. You take your favorite Western and break it down into 3 or 4 acts and do it on the tabletop with that rule set. The combat is quick, it's simple, and you can play like a whole movie's worth of scenarios in an evening. And with all those Western movies to choose from, you have endless variety. We've been talking about doing this, all the, the Man with No Name series with Clint Eastwood. Like, that should be just like a weekend thing. We'll do like all the movies in sequence. I like any group of gamers. We have an endless number of ideas. How many of them actually make it to the tabletop remains to be seen.
With the Ruthless rules, I actually had a friend that 3D prints and has got me the DeLorean from Back to the Future 3 that I want to turn that into 3 or 4 scenario rule set for Ruthless, because that's just going to be fantastic.
Oh my God, that's freaking brilliant. That's awesome. When you said 3D printed a DeLorean, I'm like, where is he? Oh, wait, I think I know where this is headed. That's brilliant.
You have to have the train too.
Right.
And the track with the end to it.
Absolutely.
That'd be an awesome scenario. You have to get it up to speed before it goes off the rails.
I don't know what he has planned with it, but at Christmas, Greg got an HO train set.
Oh.
Which apparently there's going to be something Wild West, because it's an old West train. It's a steam locomotive. He had pictures of it again. I never realized how fun it was. I didn't have trains as a kid. I didn't realize how fun it was. And he had some pictures. And I'm like, it's a Wild West locomotive. He goes, yes, for a reason. And he goes, you'll find out. I'm like,
Got to get those little smoke capsules in it too, because that'd be awesome.
I hope it blows real smoke. I really do.
Yeah, that would be really, really, really cool.
Oh, that's fantastic.
If you had to pick, I know everyone's going to be different, so this wouldn't be like necessarily the favorite for anyone else necessarily, but what is your all-time favorite miniature game? Or at least the one you had the best experience with?
My all-time favorite miniature game, I still think that one of the best produced historical miniatures war games. And the one that I always go back to for that period is Fire and Fury, which is for the Civil War. Fire and Fury, because it's a Civil War game and you're going to be a corps or division commander, requires a lot of miniatures. I'm not saying this is an entry game because you need a crap load of miniatures. But in 1990, when it came out in 1990. I mean, think about that. And it is still probably the premier ACW rule set. In 1990, there were no historical miniatures rules on glossy paper with color pictures. And when it came out, it was on glossy paper with color pictures of miniatures on the tabletop, beautifully done with beautiful scenery. Like every other page had a color shot, and they used Gettysburg as their game to do all the color photographs with. So, if you're an ACW buff, Gettysburg is the Grail battle of the war. And the mechanics have stood the test of time. The presentation was way ahead of its time. And while it takes a few read-throughs to understand all the concepts, the rules are laid out in the sequence of play, which you would think should be just a thing, but it isn't. I mean, quite frequently, regardless of whether it's a miniature game or a fantasy game or a historical game, the rules and the sequence of play are not always laid out in order. But Fire and Fury is laid out in the turn sequence. Basically, as you go through the rule book, you're going through the turn sequence. The thing that happens in the first part of the book is the thing that happens in the first part of the turn. And to this day, I'm still like, did not everybody look at this? Because go back and look at this, because this is how you should lay out a rule book. And I've never not had a good game with that rule set. That's what made me want to do Civil War miniatures. I was at a hobby shop and I saw it there. I'm like, Civil War miniatures. And I looked through it and like, this book is beautiful. I will buy that. And I will buy miniatures, probably some of which are still in a box behind me unpainted.
See, that's perfect. That's awesome. Now, I will say when you said Fire and Fury, I was like, Vikings! And then you said Civil War. I was like, Civil War!
Yeah, that rule set, like you said, it has stood the test of time. Came out in the 90s there. It's only into its second edition, I believe. Yeah. So take that, Games Workshop. You don't have to, you might want to edit that out so we don't get a letter.
No, let it happen. I've already said. They just print money. That's what they do.
You can't see it from this angle, but in front of me on my whiteboard, podcast talking points. And one of them is, don't knock Games Workshop directly, maybe.
But I mean, yeah, that rule, you don't have to put out 15 editions for the games. It doesn't need to happen. If you have a good rule set that works, it's great. And that's saying something in this hobby. And I know you'll back me up on this one, Tony, is the rule sets seem to have a longevity of only a couple years, which is the hardest thing. And being in this hobby, you just collect rule sets because it's hot and it's great, and then disappears within 2 years, and you're on to the next thing that does almost the same thing.
And here's where I don't know if I have a split personality. I maybe collect rule sets. I have just a mountain. My girlfriend came into my room one day as I'm putting stuff on the shelves, and she looked at me and said, for somebody who doesn't like rules, you sure own a lot of them. I'm like, touche. But I collect rules, but I tend to find myself sticking with, and not always, but I tend to stick with stuff that I played for a while. That seems to be my go-to stuff. Now, there are some exceptions. 2 World War II games that are new-ish. One of them new to me, although it's been out for a few years. Fireball Forward, which Mark Festoso wrote, is, as soon as I played it, he invited me and one of my friends to a game, and after meeting at the convention, and as soon as I played it, I was like, oh my God, this is like Squad Leader in miniature, like not Advanced Squad Leader, GI Anvil, Victory, all the stuff that came after. But like if you took just the original Squad Leader, which was a simple game, it reminds me of that, the original, and it's like a company level action where a stand is a squad, and it's a fun game, and it's got some funky mechanics. It's a fun game. It's been out a few years, but it was new to me. I was like, how did I miss this? Because it's a really great game. The other one that I really thought I would not care for is O Group, C.R. Brown from Ricewitz Press, which is a spin-off of Two Fat Lardies. And I'm not a gigantic fan of the Two Fat Lardies games, and I was concerned because this is going to have the taint of Lardies. I was prepared to be unimpressed. And we've played it a few times. I'm like, wow, I really like this game. And I told Greg, I said, when we get around to doing the rules review of this, I want to do the rules review, because I was initially like, none of that for me. And now I'm like, oh my God, I'm a fanboy. And it's nice when you find something like that, like, wow, this is because there's only so many ways to reinvent the wheel. And like you said, there's so many different rule sets, and they have that cycle. I firmly believe, because in this day and age, it's so easy to publish and print things so that anybody and their brother can be producing. I'm not going to say high quality in terms of of gameplay, but you can make a slick looking publication with not nearly the time and effort it used to take. You don't have to find a publisher. It can go print on demand. From talking to people who have published their own games, apparently the cost of getting stuff printed in China is stupid cheap. So I think that helps drive that new edition, new rule set every couple years, because there's not that cost that there used to be.
You're talking a lot about like all sorts of different rule sets, and that is something that definitely can intimidate new people, and it's a problem with all tabletop gaming, board gaming as well. It's like the idea of, I have to constantly learn new rules, which is not really true, because board gaming is, and I'm sure miniature gaming is the same, is iterative. Everything is built on other games. Playing something that's completely unrelated theme-wise, you could go from a sci-fi shooter game to a trading in the Mediterranean. A lot of those rules that you learned from that first game will carry over to this second game. So when you're reading the rules, you realize, I already understand this concept. I skipped this whole page. And even if you're going from like, a couple games that are like 1 or 2 pages each, you still learned a lot of the concepts that you need for those more complex games.
Oh, you are absolutely correct. Like you said, whether it's a board game or a miniatures game or a board war game, there's only so many game mechanics. There's only so many ways you can define the characteristics. And if you've played a couple of games, you understand some of the basic game mechanics. So, it's an incremental thing. And you can't jump from, like, if you went from Parcheesi to Advanced Squad Leader, you're just going to be frustrated. If you went to anything from Advanced Squad Leader, you might still be frustrated. But, if you worked your way from Parcheesi to Risk to Squad Leader to Advanced Squad Leader, as you progressed along that chain, the ability to just pick up more complex rules would kind of just be a regular evolution. And you had said about, all these new rules, and you don't have to. You don't have to go with the next rule set. If you find something, whether it's a board game or a miniature game, a war game, a party game, when you find something you like, you don't have to buy the next big thing and stop playing what you play. If a game is good, it's good forever. I mean, I have some games. I have the Russian campaign on my shelf. The Russian campaign is dated in terms of the graphics, and it's 1/2-inch counters and, little hexes. In terms of all that stuff, it's dated, but it's still a solid game, and it's still an enjoyable play. That part doesn't change. Somebody came along with a slicker game, and if you do any kind of board war gaming, you got 6 titles for the Civil War and, 3 or 4 games for the Normandy invasion. They're all just different variants on the same theme. The events don't change, just how they're presented. So if you find something you enjoy, keep playing that crap.
Yeah, I mean, it's easy to get sucked up into new hotness, but you don't need to be. I'm constantly buying new games. I really enjoy learning new games, but I still have games that are 30 years old. I have Cosmic Encounter, which I love to play as much as I can.
Oh, that's a brilliant game. That is so fun.
I just picked up Robo Rally, which is another game that's 30 years old. And they're great games. Yes, it's nice to be in the new, but you don't have to be.
Yeah, that's one thing. Like playing Bolt Action, they have the second edition. Probably I've only implemented half of what's in that because there's some stuff in there that I just don't like, and I'd rather just play the first edition worth with just a couple splashes of the second.
Yeah, that's I don't know that that's at all uncommon, really. Whether it's board games or miniatures games, I've sometimes bought the next edition thinking, well, if this was good, that will be even better. To go, that wasn't really what I was looking for, because the next edition took it in some direction that I didn't really. I long ago had a giant orc and goblin army for Warhammer Fantasy Battles, and I stopped playing when 4th edition came out. I started playing, and a friend had the first edition that was shipped over from England, and it was 3 books, and they were black and white. And then the second edition came out. It was 3 books, but they had color covers. Woo! So we were playing that. And third edition came out. It was that beautiful hardbound book and had all kind of color illustrations. It was just fantastic. We were totally floored by that. And we were playing it like every other weekend. And I built this gargantuan army. And then 4th edition came out. And I was like, this isn't better. It's just different. Between that and I showed up at a tournament at the local game store. And I was told that I couldn't play because this was an official Warhammer Fantasy Games Workshop tournament. And my army wasn't all Games Workshop figures. Therefore, I could not play. I'm thinking to myself, that jackass over there didn't paint his army. How is that guy at the table and I'm not? Because of the brand of my... And then after that, I sold that army. I was like, you people.
Yeah.
The hell with you all.
I had the wrong edition because I had a previous edition and they removed them from the new edition, but I was still using them. And I didn't have the right equipment attached to it. Colors were wrong. And it's like, oh my God, you guys take this way too seriously.
They are the Napoleonic gamers of fantasy games.
They really are. I will say that I'm the weirdo of this group. I actually enjoy reading rule books. I read them constantly. And some games I actually enjoy reading the rule book far more than I like playing it.
Oh, yeah.
Because I play the game and I'm like, well, that didn't work out. And I like organizing and doing all this fun stuff. And that's like 50% of the fun for me is reading the rule books, discovering the games and opening them up. So I'm the weirdo that likes that. But yeah, there's some games where I'm like, this is going to be awesome. And then I play it. I'm like, no. Mm-mm.
Oh, yeah.
Or I'm like, this is going to be awful. And then I play it and I'm like, this is awesome. So,
I don't remember the rules set. I had a couple of buddies that were big into Ancients. And they had enormous collections, just these gorgeously painted 28 millimeter ancient figures. Mm-hmm. And they had Rome and Carthage and Gauls and Germanic tribes, and they had Saxons and Normans, and they had this rule set. One of the guys was always the new rule set. This was the ultimate. This just came out, and this will be the ultimate rule set. And next week, if something came out, he tossed that one in the corner. And this is, and I for the love of me, I cannot remember the rule set, but you had to take a test. You had to take some sort of quality test. You made a die roll to see if the unit would enter into combat. Okay, on the face of it, I could maybe accept that premise. Will my guys charge in there like I want them to? Sure, I'll accept that as a possible game mechanic. We're playing Romans, Caesar's legions crossing the Rhine into Germania.
They pretty much have to do that. So I'm like, yeah, he's going.
we could not, for the love of us. It was okay, some bad dice rolling, but we could not get units to engage. The two armies are standing there basically shouting insults at each other for the whole game. Finally, we gave up. We couldn't get two units to come together in combat. Like, how did you not read this? How did you not figure out that? How did none of us, all three of us were guilty. How did none of us look at the rules and go, this could be a problem? But we set up this giant table and all these miniatures, and yeah. We couldn't have a battle. We couldn't make the troops fight each other.
Now, that might be a cool, not quite like that, but that might be a cool mechanic for like a Coliseum style game, because the warriors could be like, I am invincible, and the other one could be like, this is nuts.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because I can't imagine that everybody chucked into the Coliseum was super gung-ho to get at
it. They're like, can I get out of here?
I know James is going to be asking this question here pretty soon, so I'm going to jump in before he asks the question. So is there any current favorite board games that are played at the club?
I think the current favorite board game at the club is Twilight Imperium, which I have yet to play. I've yet to get in on one of those sessions, but they're playing the living crap out of that. I'll be honest. Here's how it happened. Everybody else in the club is college educated and has a real job. I am not. And so the only way an old cracker like myself can make a comfortable living is to put in a lot of long hours. I have a job that pays well, but it involves a lot of long hours, and we don't get much in the way of holidays. Everybody else is off for President's Day, Columbus Day, Martin Luther King Day, Memorial Day, Veteran Day, blah, 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 blah. And so they're like, oh, we're all off today. We're going to go to the bar and we're going to grab some wings and have some pints. And then we're going to go down and we're going to play whatever. You want to join in? Like, want to? Yes. Am I? No, not a thing.
I I will say,
So I've missed it.
if you like space operas, so basically space opera is in like, it's a sprawling game
Oh,
where
yeah.
you're going to play a faction, and you're not just in there to like blow up other stuff. You actually have to negotiate and deal with your other players in a multifaceted way. And there's like political, there's military, there's economic, all these different layers that you can go for. So there's a ton of different avenues that you can follow throughout this game, and it's in the game, so you don't have to think it all up. You're just like, okay, well, I'm going to try to put this law forward that I'm going to say is going to benefit you, but I got this idea. And you can trade goods and do that. Or you could be like, you need to stop moving to that planet, or I'm going to blow you up. It's just an amazing, amazing game. Now, it does take 6 to 8 hours. And I would highly recommend that if you do find the time to play it, and you do enjoy that thing, it's like the best game, period, for that. There's 32-minute rules videos. I would just suggest watching that, and then you don't have to have anyone explain anything, preferably, right before the event, because there is a lot of rules to that game. That's what makes the game so good, actually, is that because it has that rule set to it, makes it open, but yet still have structure. So it's not like everyone just goes off into nowhere land. There's a structure there. You can deal with it, and you can negotiate with the other players in all these different facets, and it's just open. Like, it's an open world with that. So I love that game, as you can tell. And if you like that idea, I think you would love it too. But again, time, 6 to 8 hours.
And it does seem to be, it is a big hit with the club. And I find that when we play board games, we tend to play stuff that's civilization building or that's got some political elements to it. We've played most of GMT's coin series games at the club. All of those are just fantastic games. And he's used that multiplayer asymmetrical warfare concept with Caesar in Gaul, the Vietnam War, the drug wars in Colombia. We've played all of those. Those are fun. And that's for that same reason, because there's that whole relationship building and making alliances, before you stick the knife into your buddies. Those games, if we're board gaming, something along those lines is a favorite.
That coin system is one of the greatest things to come out of GMT.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, that is amazing.
And that was another one of those where somebody was describing it to me, and I'm like, I don't know what I think of that concept. I'm not sure how that concept would work. And then I sat down and played Fire in the Lake, the Vietnam one. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh my God, this is genius.
With that said, and what would be, because I'm really into... I really like Anglo-Saxon stuff. I like anything in that area with the wars and stuff in that time period. I really like The Last Kingdom and stuff like that. What would be a good miniature game for that?
If you're into that sort of Dark Ages thing and you don't want to dive into large armies, Raven Feast, Saga, I'm trying to think, there's some other things that are similar genre or similar scale rather in that genre, but those would be the first two that pop into mind. I'm sure probably when we're done here, I'll be like, there's the other rule set that I wanted to mention. I think both of those give a good experience in a small scale skirmish.
I've heard of the Saga one, so I'm definitely going to check that one out because that sounds really good.
Yeah, and Saga, I'm sure you can get as a PDF too. And I don't know how you three gentlemen feel about it, but I have mixed feelings about PDF rulebooks. The idea of having the rulebook as a PDF allows me to cut and paste stuff so I can print out like key points for, we're going to play this rule set tonight, and here's like the key stuff that you need to know without having a copy of the rule book. But I personally prefer a paper rule book, and I don't know, am I in the wrong?
No. Well, I mean,
no.
I mean, it's a big thing for a lot of people is the PDF stuff, but I get a PDF and I'm like, can you print it? I don't want to read this.
How does this work?
Can you kill a tree so I can touch it? Because I really want to do that.
Every PDF that I've gotten, I have run through the laser printer. I have it work, and it is sleeved and in binders now because I personally need to hold the rule book. I got to have it.
Yeah, I'm with you there. There's something, it's part of the process. In my mind, it's part of the experience when we play a game that when I have a question, I grab that document and I thumb through it and I find the answer. And I know that I can pick up the tablet and scroll down, but it's not the same experience. Part of what we do, especially in miniature gaming, part of the appeal for miniature gaming is that it's tactile. Not only rolling dice is common to all games or most games, but the three-dimensional aspect of it, lift the roof off the building and move your guys in there, move your guys over that fence or across that stream. The fact that they're guys instead of cardboard counters, that's part of the appeal. And it's a huge part of the appeal in miniatures gaming as opposed to a board game of some sort, is that it's three-dimensional, it's tactile, it's very hands-on. And for me, the rule book should be part of that too. If the rule book is going to be on my screen, I might as well play a computer game.
Yeah, that other thing too is like if I take the game and we're playing the game, I don't want to hand someone my iPad and be like, here, look it up. Like, here's the rule book. You could see it. It's just weird.
I only really use PDFs if it's a game that's either a prototype or the rules are not well written. So I'll print it off. I'll be reading it. Okay, I don't understand this. I can't find this rule. Control F on the PDF. Basically, being able to search really helps.
Yeah, PDFs, I other than printing them out, the only time I ever use them is, all right, well, I just saw the nurse. The doctor should be in about 15 minutes. So where was I? Page 42. Let's continue on.
Yeah.
Even books. I can't read books on PDF.
No. You know what? I stare at a computer screen for a large part of my day. In my relaxation time, I don't want to have to stare at the damn screen then, too.
I spend 10 hours a day on a computer. So,
no matter how much you spend on your screen, it's still going to be tiring on your eyes compared to paper because it's actually emitting light, whereas paper it does reflect a little bit, but not any significant amount.
Is there anything you would like to throw in or talk about towards the end here?
I guess if I was to boil it down, if you're playing something other than a historical miniatures game and you want to try it, go to as many venues as possible to see people playing the games. Find groups, go to a convention, whatever. See a variety of games run by a variety of people, a variety of styles, so that you can see that all the potential. If you just go with one guy, you could be disappointed. And maybe you're going to miss out on something that would be enjoyable for you just because you had one bad experience. Don't put yourself in that position. Don't feel that you have to jump in whole hog, both feet. You can start out with a simple set of rules, and there's plenty of sites where you can download some stand-up Vikings, some stand-up Saxons, some stand-up Nazis, and some stand-up GIs to shoot them down, and try some simple games. Do that. Don't feel that you have to limit yourself to, if you think maybe I like World War II and you play a game and like, that's not for me. Decide what is for you and give that a try. Don't feel that you have to limit yourself in any way. This is a huge hobby that covers from biblical times to current events in scales from a little band of skirmishers to entire divisions on the table. So if you think you're interested, go to some conventions, go to some everywhere you can to see a game, see some games, try some stuff at home with your friends. If you need help, there's tons of resources online. I think you can just email Evan and he'll answer all your questions.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, there we go.
With convention seasons coming up here, it usually seems a lot of them are toward the fall now. And if you're burning some time, one fantastic place you're going to get a lot of ideas on what's going on into the hobby. I'll have to say with Tony there, Little Wars TV is a fantastic resource for you to see so many different games played, rules reviews, and it's going to get you a good idea of where you might have an interest.
Yeah, so Little Wars TV is a great intro into the miniature gaming hobby. I highly recommend checking out their website and YouTube channel. We'll have those links in the show notes for this podcast. But I'd just like to say, Tony, thank you so much for doing this interview with us.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening. If you have any feedback for us, feel free to visit us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, or Board Game Geek Guild 2989, or our website at tabletopgamingguild.com. Don't forget to like, follow, and or subscribe. Tabletop Gaming Guild is a product of Tabletop Gaming Guild, LLC. All rights reserved.